Thanks for joining us on this new season of the Future of Faith podcast. Future of Faith develops and curates resources to help connect current and future generations with their faith lives. We do this through listening deeply, gathering information with wonder and curiosity, and scaling meaningful relationships. Visit futureoffaith.org for more information and to discover sacred tools for courageous connection. Welcome to the Future of Faith podcast. My name is Greg Arthur. I'm part of the team here at Future of Faith. And in this season of the podcast, we are listening with great curiosity to the stories of faith leaders from across the diverse and beautiful body of Christ, because we really want to learn, what is God doing in the world? How are people pursuing their faith? And how can we cultivate sacred listening in our lives and in our communities? So we're trying to listen to interesting people and gain some perspective from them. And today we have an exceptionally interesting guest, friend, Dr. Vince Bacote. Vince, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. And thank you for labeling me as an interesting person.
Hey, listen, PG County forever.
Yeah,
this is true.
There it is.
I make that joke because at one point, Vince attended the same high school I did in PG County, Maryland. A shout out to Eleanor Roosevelt High School.
That's right.
And that,
right.
Which I just discovered.
Has not sunk. Because people
No.
talking about that it was on a foundation that was going to sink. Right.
Yeah. I just found out my favorite character from the show Severance, also a Roosevelt guy.
Is that right?
Yeah, Milicic. Did you watch Severance at all?
I know about it. I never saw an episode.
Okay. Anyways, just with Alan Truman. Anyways, he just won enemy. Anyways, also an Eleanor Roosevelt guy. So there you go. One more Raider in the world.
I saw somebody talk about that on Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
Singer Maya went there.
Yeah.
I think, is it Kenny Lattimore, the singer, went there?
I mean, co-founder of Google.
One of the founders, was it Sergey Brin that went to? I mean, they had a science technology program, so yeah.
There you go. Well, outside of his outstanding educational high school experience, Vince is a professor of theology at Wheaton College and a director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics. He's an author of a number of books, Reckoning with Race and Performing the Good News, The Political Disciple, Spirit and Public Theology. He's written a lot about public witness, wrestling with our faith in the political landscape, has a lot to say within that. So Vince, we want people to help to get to know you a little bit better, and we're focused on listening this season. So we got to find out what you're listening to. So it's a beautiful day. You're on the campus of Wheaton College. Maybe you're out driving around Chicagoland. Maybe you're even pulled the bass out to jam a little bit.
I can see the bass.
There you go.
In my office, but that's what to incentivize me to pick it up, of course.
So what are you listening to? What's bringing you joy? What music are you grabbing
what's
hold of?
Interesting. It depends on the day. So at this moment, it could be there's been this Joni Mitchell box set type of thing that I'm listening to on Spotify. It's called Joni Jazz, basically. That's somebody, I mean, she's still alive, but I really wish, I'd heard of her when I was a kid, but I wish I knew what that really meant, about who Joni Mitchell really was. Because I had been finding a way to see her in the 80s or 90s, and I missed that one. Just like I'm missing Miles Davis, which is a big regret of mine. So I'm listening to that. I'm among the people that are really excited about the new Deftones album, which is just incredible. Somebody said, "What's your favorite song?" I can't pick a favorite song. There's at least 4 of them. So, that's really kind of heavy. There's always occasionally some electronica thing I might be listening to. So that could be like Massive Attack or 07 or something like that. Or I mentioned Miles. Might be listening to something. If it's a really nice day, go for a drive, whatever. Listening to in a silent way, that album is just a great album to listen to.
Do you have any podcasts you regularly listen to?
I don't. I keep seeing ones I should listen to. And and so here's another thing, I guess, about people getting to know me is that I'm an extremely curious person. So I'm interested in pretty much everything. And so there's always things that are grabbing my attention. And so I might hear a piece of a podcast, occasionally listen to like a long form one if I'm driving somewhere, or if I want to check out, or if I'm trying to learn about something in particular, maybe there's a podcast where somebody's talking about that. So it really varies, honestly. And so there's not one in particular that is like the one for me. I think in the same way that sometimes people go, "Hey, Vince, what are you reading, or what are your favorite books?" I'm like, oh wow, that's really hard for me, because with me, I'm constantly pulling in a diversity of, like, I'm reading these articles or part of this book or whatever, and those things are kind of coming into this synthesis with the way my mind works in terms of trying to make sense of things or situate things. So that's something.
Well, I asked Vince to join me today because he always has great thoughts and helps me think more deeply about important issues. And one of the things that we've talked about a lot through the Substack and podcast has been I didn't have this on my bingo card, war on empathy, right? Like this came out of nowhere in my mind when there became so much dialogue about the sin of empathy, the toxic empathy, the war on empathy, and became not just a theological talking point, but really a political talking point, really echoing through it. We just wanted to spend some time thinking about that, tying that into some of the work Vince has been doing and wrestling with it. And to this theme, I wore my empathy hat today, which I show people in the back. It says, if empathy is a sin, sin boldly. So I'm staking my theological positions early. Vince, in your understanding of this, what has given rise to all of this conversation around empathy and its potential for harm in the church, and why people are so concerned about it?
So here's as best I can, I think the best face of it. We are a society where, and I think in contrast to when I grew up in the 1970s, the space race is still going on. If you talk about what's real, what's determining why you make choices about things, science is the arbiter of reality. Science is still important, but at some point in the last 20, 30 years, we have definitely moved towards being a society that's more an affective society in terms of how people sometimes are making choices about things. It's about how people are feeling. If you want to make a case for something or move someone in a particular direction, creating a certain kind of sympathetic type of case is what will lead people to say, oh, well, I don't want to be making anybody feel bad. And so I think the way that has worked out politically, if you think about one of the greatest transformations that's happened in our society, now that we're in a pushback phase against it right now, but if you think about when Bill Clinton made a policy in the military called Don't Ask, Don't Tell about sexuality, right? That was already, okay, what do we do about, gays in the military? But that was when there's a lot of conversation about, okay, how are we talking about this in society? There was like people hinting at maybe something like gay marriage or whatever, but that was not really plausible, right? And there were also, if people were talking about how does someone, what's the origins of same-sex desire? Is it nature? Is it nurture? There were these stories about twin studies. I remember a doctor named Dean Hamer, I think, who had done these twin studies. Nobody's even talking about Dean Hamer right now, okay, at least in terms of the popular culture. At some point, what began to tip the scales was not scientific studies. It was about public exposure to people that are LGBTQ. And it was about certainly a lot of stories about ways that people's negative experiences because they were gay made people want to be more suicidal or exposure or why, why you be so mean to people? And I think particularly generationally, if you think about Gen Z, millennials, I mean, the data shows them being more affirming about sexuality than Gen X and certainly than boomers and then certainly the post-World War II generation. And my point being is that, but that's all part of what was happening writ large in society. And so I think part of what the concern is of the people who are talking about this is various things, and certainly identity politics things, included not just a rational view about, okay, justice requires attending to questions around, women's rights or Me Too, or about race and civil rights, but it's about the affect, right? How you make people feel, and so I think the best face of it is that if you want to say, quote unquote, evidence is the reason why we make these public policy choices, etc., we're not really living in that world the way that we were in the world.
Yeah,
affect plays a role in that. So that's the best face of it, right? In other words, we're a affective society, and depending upon what group you're in, you don't want to be regarded as a hater of the wrong kind. You know what I'm saying? Right. Don't be a hater. But being a hater is about how you're making people feel. It's not about what the facts are. unless the facts are that you're a person who makes people feel a particular way. Right.
So the argument is flowing from people's feelings and how they're responding to things become the epistemological like framework of good or bad.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Like you've done this, so now the truth is you've made me feel this, I've experienced this. And that's a shift away from facts or of the scientific idea of that.
Yes. I think it's part of the reason why we are actually, it's one of many reasons why, 25 years ago, if you're talking about postmodernism, it's people who are reading Derrida, Foucault, etc. Not that people are still doing that, but in academic circles. But we're a postmodern society because people are not making decisions largely in the culture because they think, okay, first let me put this, metaphorically speaking, under a microscope in a lab, look at the data and make a decision. That's not how things are happening. It's much more about who's my tribe. It's about who I belong to. It's about my loyalties as well as my feelings. And so I think, again, best face of it is if you're concerned about some of those things, then you are upset that people are basically leveraging empathy because it's about how you're identifying with the feelings of others. They're leveraging empathy to open up the way towards, in terms of the people that are talking about a war on empathy, towards a more socially progressive society around sexuality, etc. But they're also a lot of them are also including race as part of that, which, as you might, really bothers me. But so some of that is true. Now, here's the flip side of it that's really problematic. Among the critiques that I've heard about the church in the last couple of decades, and people have always been complaining about churches, Christian, whatever, church people, etc.
Right.
But if you think about the kind of scandals that are happening, etc. Here is what is interesting. Nobody is saying, I think the problem with churches is that they just have too much empathy.
Overly compassionate.
Exactly.
Those people are just going out of their way and laying their life down for everybody.
Exactly.
Right?
This is not the critique at all.
Yeah.
So to me, if I'm in the Southern Baptist Convention, my problem is not that there's a sin of empathy. My problem is that people are thinking that we don't have enough of it. And that particularly we don't have enough of it when it comes to people who are victims of sexual abuse, or et cetera. And that we instead are, it's not just, in whatever way those dynamics are working out in Roman Catholic context around clergy, sexual abuse, et cetera. Same kind of thing. And so if there were a problem with empathy being weaponized for bad ends inside of churches, especially like conservative churches, then maybe I would understand. But the problem is that this is not what we're not hearing stories about, in all these churches, etc. And so Paul wants to say, instead of talking about a war on empathy or toxic empathy, etc., and especially if you want to form your people in ways where they're thinking truthfully and critically, say, you can use good things for poor ends. And we're concerned about ways that people are weaponizing the manipulation of emotions and using language about empathy and trying to talk about, and telling you narratives about different sob stories and how that's leveraging things toward a socio-political type of world that you think is not the best, then just say that. Because when I'm thinking just about the reputation of the church, it sounds to me like what a lot of people are saying is empathy is among the things that people wish that was more characteristic of what is happening in churches. And so to me, that's part of the great challenge of it for me, because I'm just not seeing people talking about, these churches are just too caring of people.
Right. So let's push into that. That's
just not what I'm hearing happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I like that. As I've written about this a lot. I've tried to review the books. I've tried to make the steelman arguments and see the cultural perspective, theological perspective at work here, and where is their resonance in truth that I can find in it, right?
Yeah.
So like Paul Bloom's book Against Empathy makes this argument for rational compassion, and he's not making a theological argument as a Christian. He is just making that we'll get to a better world through rational compassion. And a lot of what he describes is accurate. I feel like there's a hard cap on the redemptive vision of it. Yeah. But I can see the argument he's making that. Yeah. Joe Rigney's book.
But there's, the thing is about rational compassion is like last time I checked, human beings are not disembodied, non-emotional people.
Right. Right.
So,
It's an illusion that we get
so if
to
we're gonna
rational
talk about
compassion.
being whole persons.
Right.
And if you're and if it's a Christian talking about this, I mean, is he a Christian who's making the argument for rational?
No, he's not. He's
Okay.
not.
All right. Okay, then never mind.
But his work then
Maybe
is,
he's holding on to like some vision of post Enlightenment rationality carrying the day, which is
absolutely.
That project's having some challenges.
Get back to us with the details in that one, right?
Yeah.
The results in that. But his work is really picked up by and echoed in like Joe Rigney's book, which is The Sin of Empathy, and that's one where that really has been quoted and talked about a lot. And Rigney does a good job of laying out the difficulties of empathy, of defining empathy, of understanding the role it's supposed to play, and in really using like Edwin Friedman's work, like Failure of Nerve, about anxious systems and a non-anxious presence. Like, there's a lot of good source material in this.
Yeah.
But the application, which you just named, which is clearly named, it's not hidden at all inside of these books, is we're actually really concerned about anything we consider woke. And that's the phrase, and the progressive gaze is the issue, because the concern is if these voices are included, we will compromise the integrity of the church or, our faith.
Yeah. And I'm sure you probably may have done this in other episodes, but, I just want people to know that what aggravates me about people using the word woke is that you're co-opting something that was largely like a Black culture thing,
right?
Until arguably until Chris Rufo decided he wanted to use that as a way of trying to make people think that, okay, the worst thing you could be is, the Scarlet Letter was being a woke person, right? And obviously he had a certain kind of success with that, sadly. The frustration for me about that is two things. One is woke was about awareness, knowing what time it is. If you're knowing where you are you downtown,
right.
It's that's what it's about. Knowing what is really real. Now, with the ways that things began to emerge with protests post Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, etc., there were people in their way of activism were almost, I think, denigrating people that weren't right. You stay woke, y'all. You gotta know what time it is because these things are happening. But then what also happened is that woke became basically identified with any kind of progressive cause. And some of that is because of people with progressive causes using the label. And some of it's because of people like Chris Rufo and others saying that all of those things are really under the label of woke. And the problem is that do you want to actually talk about where that term came from? Or is this just convenience for your activism? And so my frustration is ways people use that. And now people go around talking about it. And what I want to ask people is, all right, is the problem one, by the way, between a bunch of white people? You've all got kind of a certain level of power, and you don't like these white college kids coming home talking about race and gender and sexuality or whatever, and some of them saying, well, in order for me to be woke, and the just thing is being woke, and it's all these causes. But it's like you white people fighting about this. Meanwhile, you're ignoring Black people, or you're saying that, you're just saying, your whatever your causes are, we don't need to pay attention to them. And so I wonder if that's part of it. But also, does this give people permission to have a smokescreen for them to be selective about the justice causes that they are going to give attention to, and the ones that they're going to say that people should avoid or aren't worth the time of day? And so then people don't have to even look seriously at things like race, etc. And so I think that's part of my frustration with the use of the term, because people use it, and I just want to know, can you tell me what you're talking about?
Right.
And I want to know, not
can you define it?
Told you what it is. Yeah. So to me, that's like you're talking about like empathy and like listening. Okay. In any relationship that you care about, listening is important. And no one likes it if people aren't actually paying attention to them, unless they're trying to be a spy or something else. And if you're using language about something and somebody says, can you explain to me what that is? And really what you care about is winning for your cause, and this just helps you for winning for your cause, you're not thinking about the fact that there are people who care about the misuse of this language and arguably the weaponizing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a weaponization. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And by the way, I would love to know the percentage of people that when they think about the term woke today, we're in 2025 recording this, that they think sexuality before they think race. I would wager that many do. Yeah.
No, that's helpful. And maybe that'll help me segue into like something else I really wanted to get be able to listen to some of your perspective on, because I think the war and empathy, the part that concerns me the most is that its application has been to shut out and ignore voices that people in power don't want to hear. They don't want to make space for, they don't want to listen to. So if I don't have to have empathy, then I don't have to listen to that, and I can rationalize it away.
Yeah.
You've just gotten done this beautiful documentary project called Black Evangelical, which we'll put the notes in for that. Highly recommend people to go watch that.
I appreciate it.
And you spent 40 hours of interviews and footage.
40
and you spent
hours.
15, 20 years
of all sum total of all the interview material.
And this project, as I encountered it and watched it, it seemed that you were really trying to capture voices that existed all along, that were doing this work, that had a vital history, but that the majority of evangelicals just never encountered.
And Black Evangelicals, by the way, don't know.
Yeah, didn't know.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about what you learned through that project, what those voices revealed? Just give us a little insight into it. I think it's really a remarkable project.
Sure. Well, interestingly, the reason that it exists at all is because of me listening to this guy, Ron Potter, in 2008 at a event with some other Black Evangelicals. And it occurred to me that he basically had the history of Black Evangelicalism inside his head. And I thought the best way to get this out of his head and into some kind of archival situation, at least, would be to put Ron in front of a camera and say, okay, just talk. Well, that's when the idea happened. Never got around to actually doing it until 2021. By that point, Today I became a partner along with my Center for Applied Christian Ethics. We brought Ron to campus. I interviewed him, and he did a lecture later that evening. I naively thought that in like 80 minutes that I could get all of this. This was quite naive. We got to the early 1970s, and then eventually we wound up with 24 interviews. And it turned into a documentary instead of something that was just going to be some kind of resource that's archival. And so with many people, I asked a lot of the same questions about what's a Black Evangelical, what are some important development, what are some challenges, what are some things that have improved, what are some challenges that remain, how do we have optimism about the future? The questions that I asked all are around that. Among the things that I learned certainly is, one, like the evangelical movement itself, Black evangelicals are a diverse group of people that have some kind of interface with institutional evangelicalism. And this is what I mean when I say that. Big picture, traditional Black church is evangelical in belief. Now, traditional Black churches don't tend to use the word evangelical, and they're really not using it these days. In terms of trusting the Bible, the centrality of the work of Jesus, the need for a conversion experience, the importance of sharing your faith. But there are also people who have interface with places like Wheaton College or parachurch groups like Crew, Navigators, InterVarsity, Young Life. And what I was hearing a lot was, okay, so you have all these people, but of course, the evangelical movement itself is an ecumenical Protestant reality. Now we can have another conversation about our Catholics, evangelicals, etc. That's another conversation. But generally, it's Protestants, and the Protestants come from lots of different backgrounds, including views where, for some people, it's really important to be talking about questions of justice and changing the world and those types of things. And on the other hand, some who are saying, look, we just need to preach the gospel. And why? It's not white people telling them. It's because of how they're interpreting the Bible or other parts of their formation within maybe even Black church context, where what we need to do is be about the word. I mean, it can be about spiritual gifting. That can be about all kinds of things, right? The point being is that you have considerable diversity within Black and among Black evangelicals. I mean, and that's not a new thing. So that was one of the very interesting things. It's interesting to hear the ways that there's kind of this paradigmatic experience for some people, especially if they've been involved in and had positions in institutional evangelicalism, of people having a sense of belonging. But your belonging is tricky because to what extent are you a person that will be even allowed to fully belong? Like there's this line that Bill Pennell has about we're the orphan children of evangelicalism, right? And there's just room for us, he said. And now some people would say, some Black evangelicals who might listen to this would say, no, I mean, I did have an experience of belonging. Others will say, it was always my belonging was predicated upon conformity.
Mm.
It was not, and it was not allowing some of my burning questions to be addressed.
Hmm.
The point being, of course, again, you have this diversity of experience, and there are some people. It's very clear that they are fine with using the term evangelical. Some people want to reclaim it. Other people, for many reasons that we can assume, they're not thinking about using that term. But they're not using the term doesn't mean they're not thinking about being faithful people or participating in the life of the church. It means that they have at least a kind of significant disappointment with institutional evangelical spaces, or they have had really certain kinds of grand devastations, and they're thinking, I just got to get out of here. I got to check out. Another paradigmatic thing is like an experience of kind of the centerpiece of the film is Tom Skinner at Urbana in 1970. And Skinner is this singular figure in terms of his abilities, his communication, etc. Skinner has your standard kind of evangelical conversion story. This gang leader who hears an evangelist on the radio, gives his life to Jesus, becomes this preacher, right? And becomes this incredible preacher, has this thing called Tom Skinner Associates, becomes this leader, this figurehead almost of Black Evangelicals, and gives this incredible speech at Urbana 70. Now, as we note in the documentary, there are a lot of things that kind of set the stage for that. But he gives that speech to this predominantly white crowd that explodes as positively as you can imagine. In other words, it was like rapturous applause. The way they put up, like a bomb went off, in terms of people just hopping up and, both vocally, clapping, all kinds of things, just responding to Skinner. And so you have Skinner doing that. Now, mostly what Skinner had been doing, he had a program on Moody Radio, for example. He was doing a lot of the standard, hey, do you know Jesus? You need to know Jesus. You should have a conversion, etc. In other words, you're focusing on the vertical relationship. When you started talking more about the horizontal realities, and particularly started doing more of that in the early 1970s, as we show in the film, his radio program gets taken off of Moody Radio. And they explicitly say because that they thought that the material become too political. And I call this a paradigmatic experience because there are a lot of people, your belonging is fine until you start asking questions about the way the world is or the way systems are set up that at least don't account for how you can flourish in those systems, or at the most where people really don't want to be dealing with some of the questions that you are bringing up in terms of politics, culture. And for some people that winds up being a lot of tension where they then decide to leave or they decide, or they may be asked to leave. In other words, like, all right, this isn't going to work because you keep bringing these things up. We just want you to preach the gospel. So, and I call that a paradigmatic experience because there are a lot of people that have gone through that. Now, there are people who've gone through that. Some have stayed in institutional evangelicalism. Others have left. And again, given the diversity of persons and experiences and backgrounds of the evangelical movement, that really shouldn't surprise us. But there's so much we didn't cover, so many questions we didn't talk about. But it was great to learn from people and people who were at that Urbana conference, or the number of people that had been involved in Young Life. I didn't know anything about that. I knew about the Navigators. I knew about the crew part. I knew about the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship part. And it's not that I didn't know that there were African Americans in Young Life. I didn't know about this 1960s Young Life thing where A.G. Miller and others were really involved in it. I had no idea. No idea at all. That was really interesting to learn about. So it's quite fascinating.
So with the stories you heard and all of these particular moments, right, where it really shifted the landscape for people, right? There was responsiveness.
Yes,
there was partnership. There were moments when it worked real well in collaboration, and moments when it didn't.
Yes.
That's
correct.
What sort of insight or wisdom did you gain in that's just helped you think about our current cultural moment?
Sure.
Like, because we have some connections and disconnections taking place.
Right.
What's some wisdom we can pull forward from some of these voices and experiences?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is, first of all, let's be aware of the fact that, and this is actually irrespective of just this particular topic of the documentary, that we are in a trajectory, or we are in a stream, but we're downstream from the contributions of other people where we've been. who sometimes I think there are people who are naming things about their dissonance with the evangelical movement like it's the first time it's ever happened. It's like, believe me, it isn't.
Right.
And so I think it's important for people to know that there are people who've been where they've been, and that for them, the virtue was not just to name the problem and then to kind of settle in a wilderness of complaint. I think social media encourages some people to do that. I'm not saying it does that to everybody, but some people I think it does. And you see people who have in varying ways decided whether moving forward means with institutional evangelicalism or outside of it. But with all of them, it's a commitment to this journey of life with God and participating with his people. And so to me, that's one of the biggest things, is that the experiences of frustration are not reason to not be participating in the life of the church. And also, whatever your concerns are with your tension with whatever situation you're in, it doesn't mean you have no agency. There may need to be a different context for your agency. Because I definitely want people to understand that they have agency with the gifts, talents, and abilities that God has given them to serve in the church and world. And they should be discerning how to do that. And what can be helping to inspire that certainly is looking behind them to see that there are people who were in the same stream with them, and they're encouraging us to go forward. And also, in spite of various kinds of tensions in the moment, shall we say, none of that means there are no possibilities in this moment. We have to think differently about what the possibilities are, particularly because if you think about what's happening in our society now around, things around, hey, no, you can't make attention to ethnic particularity part of the conversation when you're assessing things if you want to have a meritocracy. We can have another conversation about, whether such a meritocracy actually exists. But the point is that, but that's all essentially from the federal level. That's saying anything about what's happening locally. It doesn't say that you cannot ask the questions, all right, where can I discern how to move through this, or how to create something, or how to, if I'm going to try to pursue certain kinds of goods, where are the places where I can do that? Because the things aren't only done from the top down. And arguably, if you're in a country like the United States, even during Jim Crow, people were figuring out how to do things. And whatever frustrations we have right now, okay, we are not in the first half of the 20th century. Now, there might be some people who want us to get back to that. But that would take, for that to really happen, would take a lot. And I think there's a lot of people that people might be surprised would actually say, no, we're not going to go back that far. But regardless of, whether one agrees with what I just said or not, one should agree with the fact that there are contexts of agency. Are we willing to look for them? And part of what that also means, I think, is recognizing, all right, so maybe I shouldn't be just thinking about what Congress is doing, what they're doing at the White House, etc. Maybe I should be thinking about, all right, what can I find out about the way that there are things that are going on where I can be an agent of the common good towards something? Where can I find that out in my town, in my county? Because there are things for us to do, things that people can do, and then seeking to do those things. And so I think that's an important thing for us to think about. Challenges do not necessarily mean that there's no agency.
I love that as a filter for thinking about our movement today. And I think that one of the struggles I hear frequently from people in my circles, from people I serve as a pastor, has been that this is the first time for a lot of them that there have been forces outside of them which seem to be actively seeking to limit their agency or to discourage it.
Yeah.
And that this is a new experience for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most of these people are white, and they've been middle class or affluent, and this is the first time they're encountering a cultural moment that feel like there's an active resistance to the life they're trying to build. Which is why I love the voices you bring forward through the film and their experiences. Because as you named, these are people who lived in different cultural contexts and moments, but had deep agency and found a way forward in kingdom movement. Yeah. And that's an encouragement and a helpful thought for us of thinking, like, all right, great. Well, this is not the first time the people of God have faced challenges.
Not at all. There's been a lot in the world, in the history of the church.
So let's continue moving forward with identifying our agency, no matter how localized it is.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that phrase, all politics is local. I think one of the peculiar things about the United States is with this country, with this republic, where at least when I was growing up, and maybe it still happens, when people are at some point they're in elementary school, or we had junior high in my county in PG. Okay,
That's right.
7 to 9. Middle school came after my time. But somebody said at some point, and maybe one day you can be president of the United States. The point being, the citizen can be the public servant, all the way up to the mayor, the governor, the senator, etc. I remember that was somebody in my neighborhood who was a state senator. It's like, oh, you mean someone in my neighborhood can do that? The point being that those things are possible. But it's interesting how, especially around presidential elections, in the United States, we act like even though we're voting for a person with the power of a king. Now, some people might think, well, we've got one now who really wants to be a king. So believe me, this is not the first one. But the point is that the American experiment is this idea of the citizens can be public servants. And that you have representatives, etc. We're not just, okay, the whole country votes and that determines things. Obviously, it's a republic, not just a bare democracy, let's say. In our republic, the presupposes a certain kind of political agency for people. And, and all our talk about rights of assembly, all that kind of stuff. Well, if people can do that, great. But I think the problem is that if you're not feeling certain levels of pressure and discomfort in your life, you just got to trust the people above you to kind of take care of things. Well, now, if you can't now's an opportunity to say, doesn't mean you have to become a full-blown politician, but is there one thing you can identify, something you care about? In fact, here's something to care about. I just saw a report that said 54% of the people in the United States have like a literacy level of 6th grade or lower. I'm thinking to myself, excuse me. I thought, surely in the United States we're doing pretty well with literacy. Well, apparently not. And you would think, we're this superpower. Shouldn't we be the country where it has like the greatest rates of literacy, etc.? And we don't. That is something that people can do. Can you get involved in local schools helping with literacy? Can you find ways to create ways for people to be reading, etc.? In fact, honestly, something that our society needs in general is more people to be willing to pause and do more long-form thinking rather than short-form thinking amid the avalanche of information that we have all the time. And that alone is a kind of civic duty that a person could perform. Can you create opportunities for that or find out that people are doing that and volunteer in something like that? It's just one example.
It's great. Love it. I love it. Well, I think that you've given us a lot of recommendations and helpful things to like go and spend our time helping us think deeply about. And I think the documentary is a great place for people to go and then to find some people in there whose voices they encounter for the first time and then go back and read about them, encounter more of them,
yes.
Dig deeper until the 40-hour director's cut is dropped and they can turn it, or the Netflix series, right?
Yeah.
And doing that. But I really do think that's helpful because when we stop to listen with intentionality, we open up the possibility for transformation.
Yes.
We open up the possibility to learn, to grow.
Yes.
And that's what we hope empathy does. And what actually grows our empathy, because the more we listen to people who are different from us and give them space and understand their context and their story, the more we just begin to understand what good news looks like for their life.
Yes.
How does God arrive in their life?
Yes.
In liberation and freedom and healing and transformation. And that's ultimately what we're seeking out. We want to understand that for people and how to do that.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's absolutely, a society where we are willing to be people who ask more questions rather than making assertions, where we are learning in various ways, and that learning is helping us to have more compassion toward people, more curiosity about people, and a greater desire to seek the good of people. I think it's really important. And in order for that to happen, we have to be willing to do the listening and not necessarily that you're going to agree with everything that somebody says. But I always like to think about this truth, that there are people you might think there's so much about that person that I just really do not agree with. It would be interesting if you found out that that person, for example, really liked exactly the kind of music you like. And you're thinking, you like that? That's interesting. And then you find out that you were at the same concert or something, right? The point being that there are just these ways where there may be at least a little something that helps you to say, wait, I can't have a totalizing view of a person where I'm so certain about that everything about this person is the worst thing in the world. Now, is it possible that there are people who actually fit those descriptions? Yeah, given the reality of sin, it really is. But most people have not done the work with enough curiosity and asking questions to know more than like 2 or 3% about what people are really like. Because how do we know so much about people? And whatever self people present us in social media is a curated self. You're getting a certain version of what people are choosing to represent about themselves.
Yeah. Great. Well, there you go. There's our homework. If we're gonna participate in our representative democracy, if we're gonna figure out what's going on in the church, if we're gonna actually grow and experience what God's doing within us, there's some good homework for all of us as a place to start.
Well, I am a professor after all, so
imagine that.
Yeah,
Vince, thanks for your insight, your time, your thoughts on this. It's challenging, it's helpful, and thanks for doing what you do and allowing us to think more deeply about some of this.
Hey, it's great to talk with you.
Thanks for listening to the Future of Faith podcast, produced by Future of Faith, featuring original music by Kedron Boston. You can learn more about sacred listening and find a host of resources at futureoffaith.org. While you're there, make sure to sign up for our newsletter that delivers cutting-edge resources and research right to your inbox for free. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe to our channel and to leave a review. This is the Future of Faith.